I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello, everyone. I'm speaking with Fred today. Fred, how are you, my friend?
Good, Will. How are you?
I'm good. Very good. Well, we haven't really discussed your encounter much, so let's go ahead and, I guess the first question I have is, how long ago did this take place?
It was 23 years ago.
Okay. Well, just sort of delve into it. I mean, tell me what you were doing prior to the event. I mean, what had you out there that day and all that stuff?
Okay. It was during the fall. I'm going to say probably early September. The leaves had just started turning, so I wanted to go out and take a look and just head out for a walk. And this was up in Redstone, which is just shy of North Conway area. And I was out there walking out by the quarry, and they have some power lines that run through deep into the woods. And I was walking along, and the birds and stuff, they hadn't flown away yet, and there's squirrels and stuff still running around. And what really got me is all of a sudden there was no noise. It was dead silent. And my grandmother had always told me, if you're in the woods or anywhere and you don't hear noises, nature sound, you're in trouble. So I immediately stopped, and I'm looking around, and not more than 150 feet ahead of me, I see this creature type of thing, and I didn't know what it was. It was standing there. It wasn't looking at me. I got a profile view of it, and this thing was at least maybe 2 feet shorter than the halfway mark on the telephone pole.
Good Lord.
Yeah, it scared me. I mean, my heart literally stopped as I'm looking at this thing. And it like I said, it never once looked at me. It made a sound. It was a deep grunting sound, and I noticed it was scratching its back on this telephone pole. So I'm thinking to myself that the scratching, the noise that it's making, it's pleasure. It has an itch, and it's scratching itself. Sure. So what to me seems like an eternity was probably maybe a minute. I didn't get a good look at its face, but what I did notice that it was a orangutan color.
Sort of a reddish color.
Yeah, it was like a reddish brown. The hair on its body was a shorter. It had it all over its body, but the shorter on its body, but its arms and its legs were longer. The hair on its arms and legs were a lot longer than what was on its body. It had the conical head type of, the typical conical head.
Sure.
But I could see the face, and it was not clearly to make out detail, but it was a darker color. I don't know if it was a brown or a darker gray color kind of thing, but it was definitely not the same color as the hair on its body.
So it was the hair color was different.
Yes, on its face, okay. Definitely.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I stood there. Like I said, to me it seemed like forever. Just time seemed to just stop. I'm staring at this thing. The feeling in my stomach is just all knotted, and I wanted to leave as quickly as I saw this thing. So I took 3 steps back and turned to my right, which would have been the north. So I started walking, and I kept looking over my shoulder, making sure that this thing was not following me. And as soon as I heard animal noises, birds chirping, whatnot, I ran as fast as my legs could carry me.
Do you think it was aware of your presence and didn't care, or it just wasn't aware that you were there?
It could have been, but I didn't get the feeling that it knew I was there. It never looked in my direction. It could have been looking at something else, maybe a meal. It could have been looking at a raccoon in the distance. And my mistaking it, thinking it's scratching its back when it's getting ready to attack. I don't know. All I know is that it scared me and I wanted to leave. I didn't want to have anything to do with it.
How close do you think you were to it?
I was at one telephone pole and it was at another one, so I'm thinking maybe 150, 200 feet.
Okay. One more question before you go on.
Sure.
I was curious. Did your grandmother ever tell you why you should be afraid if you don't hear any animal noises in the forest? I mean, was there something that she knew that, or did she not tell you?
It's funny you say that, because she had told me of an encounter that she had, and I really never put two and two together until later on in life. She had told me that she was out riding her bike once, and she called a devil man or a wood devil. She saw it on the side of the road, and it swung its hand out and then ran into the woods. She said it almost knocked her off her bicycle.
It actually took a swipe at her.
Took a swipe at her, yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. and so could it have been kind of the same? Because the way she described it was very similar. Being I said, well, Graham, what did this thing look like? And she said it was red. It was the devil. She called it the devil.
Uh-huh.
So, red devil, wood devil, devil man, something to that effect. But it took a swipe at her and then ran into the woods.
Do you know what time frame that was when that happened to her?
That was when she was younger.
Okay.
Maybe the early 60s or so.
I was just curious to see what kind of a time frame between what she encountered and what you encountered.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. That her encounter.
Was it the same general area? Out of curiosity.
No. Hers was, I believe, down in Effingham Falls area, which is maybe half hour by car, 45 minutes by car.
And for people listening, what state is that?
No, New Hampshire. I'm sorry.
New Hampshire. Okay. And it's interesting. Sure. We don't really hear a lot from New Hampshire, but there are encounters in virtually every state.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny you say that, because after I had my encounter, it was maybe a year or two when I heard that somebody claimed they saw a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot in that same area. And I looked high and low to try to find this person, but people kept passing it off. Oh, no, they saw a bear. There's no such thing as this Sasquatch creature. And I'm like, if you only knew. So I never did find out who made that claim.
And I'm sure it's like a lot of areas where people are pretty, tight-lipped about seeing something like that.
Right, exactly. They really didn't. They didn't talk too much about things like that. And if they, if somebody did, you were ridiculed. You're a nut job, basically.
Right, absolutely.
I didn't know much about the Bigfoot. I did see the Patty film. Actually, a gentleman, I guess he was a researcher, back in 1976, came to our elementary school and showed the Patty film. He had some photos, castings, and whatnot. And I had always been interested in Bigfoot. And so when he showed that, I had a lot of questions and whatnot. And he was actually a friend of my grandparents. So that had come to the school, and I forget his name. I think the last name was Badger.
Uh-huh.
And I can't remember what his first name was. It was either Merrill or Keith, and I don't know. But like I said, they showed the Patty film to everybody, and then we went outside, and he had a table set up with his castings of a footprint, and he said he was going to the Northwest to research Bigfoot.
He was local then.
He was. He lived in my grandmother lived in Freedom, and that's where this gentleman was.
Mm-hmm.
That was a researcher, and he moved to the Midwest, and I never heard from him again.
After you had the encounter, did you talk to anybody about it?
I didn't tell a soul. Like what I did was I hit pavement, ran, got to my vehicle, get in, and drove to a populated area, and I just stayed in the car, just long enough to calm myself down, because I wasn't telling anybody, not a soul.
That's a pretty unsettling event. I mean,
right? I didn't know what this thing was, to be honest with you. What I grew up believing to be Bigfoot was what you saw on the Patty film,
mm-hmm.
and what I saw wasn't. Didn't resemble it at all.
Well, okay, let's go ahead and cover that a little bit then before we go on. Can you I think everybody's pretty familiar with the Patterson film that's
right.
listening. I guess maybe describe some of the differences.
Oh, okay. Well, I really wish I had gotten a good look at the face, but I didn't really. I just got the profile view of it.
Sure.
And it, the hair color on the body, which was the reddish, and just being so huge, just tall, enormous. It was like a really jacked up basketball player.
Mm-hmm.
And the legs on this thing it looked like it was meant for running, like an Olympic runner. It was just so muscular. And the buttocks on this thing was just, a massive muscle.
Yeah, I have actually heard that before. So do you think, is your impression, was it male or female?
Thinking back on it, I'm going to say that it was a female. I never did notice breasts, but
right.
I could have had them, but I didn't really pay that much attention at it.
And if it doesn't have young, a fairly newborn, it may not have,
right.
Noticeable breasts.
Yeah. And the hands, it looked like a human standing there, but just so much taller and covered in hair. Just
let me ask you, when you saw the profile of the face, now I know I'm the same way with my own initial sighting. I didn't really get a great look at the face because of the lighting, but the one thing that I do remember, and I was curious about yours, was especially a profile view. Was the face flat, or was it a protruding face? Like another ape would have.
It did have somewhat of a protruding face. It not so much like you'd see on a dog, kind of, but it did
more like
have
maybe like a gorilla or a chimp, maybe.
Yeah. It wasn't not like a human. Not flat like a human, but definitely it stuck out a little.
The reason I ask that is because it's one of the ways we identify the different types.
Right.
And for people listening who may not be familiar with that, we know about at least four different types. And that one with the protruding face is what I call a type 3.
Type 3, okay.
Right, and which is different than the Patterson Sasquatch. That's a type 1. That one actually has a very flat face, and the mechanics are kind of different. the
Okay.
Type 3. That's why I was interested in knowing the differences, if you compared and contrasted what you saw versus what everyone sees on that film.
Right. Yeah, and I had, and the arms, they seem proportionate to what would a human's would be for the size of the thing. Everything seemed very proportionate, except for, like I said, the whole leg muscular system. It was just, this thing looked like it could outrun anything it wanted, and without breaking
could.
Yeah, I wasn't about to find out.
No, it's not one of those things you want to know.
No. Before I had this encounter, back in 1990, a group of us had all been playing paintball for a couple of years, and my parents lived right on these railroad tracks, and they abutted not state property, it was town property, where basically a stump dump. And so us kids, we would go down there and play paintball and build forts.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd build some forts, and we would do it in the wintertime because it was just easier, no mosquitoes, no ticks, didn't have to worry about that while playing around and building these forts. So we built some forts, pretty sturdy forts, out of, 4-inch pine, and had them set up. And my buddy and my brother and I would go down pretty much every day to check on them, add things, whatnot. Well, one day we went down there, and the fort was totally destroyed. I mean, the limbs were literally snapped in half, these branches, and strewn. We looked for, footprints to see, okay, what jerk is coming down here and breaking these things. And any kind of markings were all kicked up, dug up, like someone had gone through and then taken the foot and just swung it back and forth to cover any kind of tracks that it had.
Yeah.
And so, we repaired it, and we're like, okay, we're all going to come back down here tonight in the dark and catch this jerk that's doing this. So it was in the I'm going to say February. I think that's when it was. And we were walking down the tracks. It was my brother in front of me in the middle, and my buddy behind me. And we had this Coleman light on a stick, and we were holding it high. And we round the corner, and we get into this open area before the tree line, and blood-curdling scream let out. It was just like a woman was dying kind of scream.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing I know, I hear foot hitting ground, and I turn around. My buddy's halfway down the tracks. He's gone. He's already gone.
I think I would have been gone too.
and my brother is like, he's standing there frozen. I'm like, we gotta go. And we booked it. And in the woods, I hear crashing. This thing was charging. It was coming. And
coming towards you.
Yeah, coming towards us. And realizing now, I think we actually may have frightened it off, because I think it was after my buddy, because he was the first one to go, and I think it was after him. And like when we were all in single file, so I think it may have thought that there was only one person there.
Oh,
and
right.
then when it heard us two running in the same direction as my buddy, it got scared off and went back into the woods. And I tell you, we took us maybe 30 seconds to get into that door, and we all flew in to slam the door. And my mother and father were like, "What's going on?" Like, we just heard this devil cry out in the woods, and they're like, "Oh my God!" We didn't know what it was, but looking back on it now, could it have been? Yeah, definitely. Because
sure.
I've heard bear scream, I've heard fisher cat. They say we don't have mountain lions up here, but I've heard those.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just a terrifying, blood-curdling scream, like the which I have never heard again, except for listening. I've listened to your show, and one gentleman did the scream, and listening, I had to stop and sit down. I mean, the scream was dead on.
Wow.
Yeah. That he did. I'm like, wow, that was exactly the scream I heard. It scared me.
I think, you know, when you hear one of these screams, and I've heard quite a variety of noises these things make over the years, there's one that really stands out in my mind because of the sheer volume. And I was in the Olympic Mountains in Washington State. My girlfriend and her kids at the time were up there camping, and we decided to take a short walk after dinner, and it was just before dusk. So we walked up to this ranger station that was not in use, and on the way back, now we were camped on a river where it was divided by this huge ridge, and this scream let out maybe 100 yards above us up on the ridge. And it just reverberated through the canyon. It was, I'd never in my life heard anything like that and that loud. I knew instantly it was a Sasquatch.
Right.
So, and you could hear people, dogs everywhere, people all, you know, through the campground down below. Everybody was going, "Oh my God, what was that? What was that?"
Yeah,
and of course,
I'm just sitting back going, yeah.
And of course, I had my recorder in my shirt pocket, but it only screened once. So I'm thinking, damn, I could have had a great recording, you know, at that close of proximity, but it didn't happen again. But it's one of those things, you know, you just can't. It's hard. It's impossible to describe it. I've never heard anything like it, even to compare it to.
No, you can't. I mean, you're not even close. I mean, if I were to do it, it wouldn't give it justice for me to even try. It was just such a scream that, you know, it was. And
it did have it had a great deal of volume, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yep. You know, and to have people say to you, "Oh, you heard a bear." Well, there wasn't a bear because I'll tell you why. It was February and bears are hibernating.
Right. Very true.
So they're not going to be out. It was just the sheer power that this thing put off.
Yeah, it's not likely crazy. A bear, no. No. And I'm thinking it was possibly a juvenile in the woods. What makes you think that?
I think it was trying to, you know, establish territory, and with us out there making these structures, if you will,
could be
out in the woods.
Could be, or a sentry.
It was getting ticked off, you know, thinking, hey, who's in my territory making these things?
Could have been a sentry too, warning others.
Right. Yeah. I did go on a research back in last month. Mm-hmm. It was 5/20, where I did come across a footprint. It was and I believe I sent you the picture on that.
Yeah, well, go ahead and tell us, you know, what made you pick the particular area and just, you know, go into what happened.
Well, I would hear what sounded like coyotes to me out in the woods, and listening to your shows, you know, I thought, well, if there's coyotes, maybe this thing is hanging out with them. So I went down. There's tons of trails. There's a biking trail, but other than the biking trail, there's tons of snowmobile trails, and that's one I had decided to go down. And I get down a good halfway down this path, and I just get a uneasy feeling, and I'm looking around, and I've talked to Jeremiah Fountain, and he's given me a lot of good information. So I make my call. I felt foolish, but I did it anyway. So I make a call. I didn't really hear anything at first, and all of a sudden I hear, and maybe it was just my imagination, but it sounded like the samurai chatter behind me. Uh-huh. So I immediately turn around, and there's nothing there. Well, I didn't see anything. Could there have been something there? Could have been. These things are such good at hiding. So after hearing that, I just felt as if something was following me. Mm-hmm. So I come across this. It was an old truck bed, like a bread truck, and you know, the hair on the back of my head stood up. I'm just like, oh, is this like a hangout for some crazy guy hanging out in here.
Sure.
So I can't get over to it because it's kind of underwater. We had some rain. The width, I thought I was going to have to build an ark. But so I'm kind of standing there going, well, can I get to it or not? And I'm like, no, there's no way I can get over there. So I start to walk, and as I move, I look down. I'm like, huh, what is that? So I get down on my knees, and I'm looking. I'm like, that's a print. So I get out my tape measure. I measure it, and it's from what looked like toes to its heel was 13 inches long by 8 inches across. And that's the only one I found. I couldn't see any more, but like I said, the one side was underwater, and the other side was completely covered in pine needles. So nothing's gonna leave any print on that. So I did see a couple of odd structures, and I don't know. I really don't know much about the structures, whether they're them doing it or if it's somebody out in the woods doing it. Who knows?
You know, my opinion, and I knew, and again, for people listening, I'm probably the first person to put anything out about Sasquatches doing anything to trees. In my first book, what I published in 2010, Notes from the Field Tracking North America Sasquatch. And back in 1991, a buddy of mine and I were up in the Washougal watershed. I mean, we were deep in the watershed, and it took us five tries to get in there. It was such a difficult area to traverse. So when we did finally get in there, we searched the watershed, didn't really see anything. Now, this was close to where I had my second sighting. So that's why I wanted to search that area, because it was very remote, and another researcher many years ago, back in the early 70s, had attempted to get into that same place and failed. So I was determined, being a very stubborn Norwegian, I had to get in there, and I'm sure you know how that is. So
yes,
we got in there, and then once we searched the terrain in there, decided to go upslope, and there was a saddle up there that we felt was the place. Now, this is based on a lot of sightings around the whole area, so I was looking at terrain and knew they had to be crossing from one area to another, and there was a particular saddle that would have been ideal for them to cross from one water basin to another. So we were climbing up to the saddle, and we stopped for a break, and I happened to see this tree. Now, we were inside of a heavily closed canopy, and this was a small Douglas fir tree, maybe 20 feet or so tall, about 3 inches thick, and 8 feet up, and I measured this, it was 8 feet 1 inches from the base of the tree up to the break. It was snapped 90 degrees over. I mean, like you'd grab it with one hand and just snap it over.
And snap. Oh, wow.
And it was freshly done. This was in July. There was had been no bad weather for a month or two. So, I mean, it wasn't weather. It was, like I said, inside a closed canopy on a ridge, so there was no wind in there. There was nothing that would have done this. So I was kind of scratching my head thinking, well, I can't find any reason for this. And I happened to look, and we were on the big ridge, and there was a little ridge that sort of went parallel to the slope. And I looked about 100 yards down, and there was another one. So we followed this ridge down, and about every 100 yards or so, we'd find one of these. We ended up counting 13 of them before I said, well, we're running out of daylight. We need to get back out of here. So I don't know how far it would have gone, but I talked to a Klamath Indian friend of mine at the time. He says, oh, yeah, that's Bigfoot did that. That's how they mark their routes. That's one telling the rest of them what direction they're going in.
Isn't that interesting?
And it was bizarre. So when I found another one in Northern California here, and it was a little bit different because it was a ponderosa pine tree, a little bit shorter but not much, and it was up about that high, about 8 feet. in a group of other trees, it was the only one. I mean, it was twisted like you would take a wet cloth and wring the water out.
Right.
It was twisted like that, and it was the middle of July. It was freshly done, only a few days old. It was twisted so hard you could see all the way through the trunk.
Oh, wow.
And I remember Bob Titmus many years ago showed me some of these things he found from the Bluff Creek area when all the Sasquatch activity was going on there. And he says, I don't know what this means. He says, and he took a lot of these, he cut them off, but they were much smaller than what I found.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, well, I used to find these all over the place when I found tracks. I'd track follow the track lines, and he says I'd find these little limbs twisted and bent over. And he says, so, when you're out there, he says, you keep it in the back of your mind. And I thought, well, okay, anything could do what he showed me. But
right.
But when I found these, it was like, I'm the kind of person, if it's not something that's real plain evidence, like footprints or something like that, it's got to slap me across the head before I really pay attention to it.
Yeah, I'm the same way. If it's any way man could have done it, or nature could have done it,
right? So and that was my thinking. When I decided to put a couple of those pictures in my first book, I just knew that all kinds of crap was going to come out. That everybody was going to start seeing all sorts of weird things in nature, and then saying it was Bigfoot.
Right.
So my advice to people is, if you see something out there, take a very wary look at it and don't just pronounce that it's Bigfoot. I mean, even some of these, you see these real ornate things that people take pictures of and put on Facebook. I mean, it might be a jokester like me. I'll go out and make things just to screw with people.
Yeah,
I used to do it after the Blair Witch Project came out years ago. We used to make the little thing. We'd go camping, and I would make these figures. We tarp.
Oh my gosh.
We tarp up the camp, right, to keep from getting wet when it rained. So I'd buy a ball of twine, and it was something we just burn, when we pull up camp and go. But I started making these stick figures and using the twine and hanging them up. and my buddies look at me and they'd say, "You're really a bastard."
That's not funny.
we always sort of wondered, what the next people coming there to camp would think when they found something like that.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I'm just saying, there's
God.
lots of jokesters out there, so you don't know. I mean, especially when this stuff proliferates on Facebook and places like that, there's got to be people out there doing it. And there's a lot. I've seen a lot of things that were done by nature. That people would say, "Oh, well, something made that, or somebody made that." No, it's just the way, in storms, there's freak things happen in the forest.
Yeah, especially, I see a lot of these pictures of birch trees on Facebook. Oh, look, a Sasquatch was here. Well, you get a heavy downpour, and birch trees are going to bend. They're going to tip.
Absolutely, all that weight in the top.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But what I saw was maybe a 3.5 inch in diameter tree, and it wasn't very high up, but it was in fact twisted.
Yeah.
And bent down. So I did take a picture of that, and the other thing that kind of struck me as odd, and it's funny you say the Blair Witch Project, because there was X's all through the forest, and it was only on one side of this path, and the side of the path that it was on, there was markings on the tree that the Fish and Game had put up, and it stated that this side of the forest is Fish and Game property, keep out.
Right.
So, and that's where all these X's had been placed. Trees.
I see people, taking photographs of that too, and I'm still not really sure what to make of that myself.
Right.
Again, it's like I've got to see something in conjunction with it that says, that one way or another that if a Sasquatch did it, there has to be some sort of evidence in conjunction with it. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I want to see a Sasquatch doing it. If I see a Sasquatch doing it, then I'm going to say, yeah, definitely.
Sure. I prefer being a skeptic when it comes to a lot of things we're not sure about. Until we are pretty sure, then,
Exactly, yep. You're right. And so after finding, I wish I had taken out some type of casting material, but being new at the research thing, I went out there light, didn't take much out there, a camera, cell phone.
It happens a lot.
Have a picture.
I remember when I first got started in this too, back in the 70s, and after meeting John Green and Renee DeHinden, we all decided that we were going to be, and they asked us to be their eyes and ears, so we decided, we were going to be Sasquatch hunters and go out and help them. Right. And we found tracks on occasion. Never thought about casting. And nobody was volunteering the information to tell us how to cast.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
We take pictures, of what we found and send them to Green or DeHinden, and they, usually write back and say, "Oh yeah, that was a pretty good track," and that was the end of it. We figured, okay, it's out of my hands. I've done my job. I passed it on to the big shots.
Yeah, I've done everything I could. So yeah, but after that, I looked through some more, and then I didn't see any kind of tracks or any other sign that something might have been up there, and that was Saturday. So Monday and the 22nd, I work late, so I had come home, and I let my dog out. I was putting away my dinner pail and getting ready to go to bed, and I let her in, and she was going absolutely crazy outside, running around, and she flew up the stairs, and she's not usually like that. You have to kind of call for her to come in, and I heard something out in the distance, and it sounded kind of like a coyote making some ki-yi noise, but it was off. It didn't sound right. And then it kind of got a little more ramped up, and towards the end, it made this sound.
Oh, that's very uncoyote-like.
Yeah, and the hair on the back of my head was just like, I'm trying to find the record button on my phone to record this. So I come in and I get my wife. I'm like, you got to come out and hear this, because I don't want to be the only one hearing this. And by the time we get back out there, it had stopped and gone where it had come from.
Was it an individual or was it multiple?
It sounded like one.
Just one. And that's unusual too, because typically coyotes are in packs or groups. Right.
Yeah.
And usually there's a lot of yipping and barking and stuff like that. You know?
It was just the sound of it. It was, to me, it sounded like somebody was trying to copy a coyote
imitation
sound. Yeah, and then at the end, I think it either got what it wanted, and that's when I heard that, the growl rumble at the end, and then it took off. To me, I think it was hunting and it was trying to get a meal.
The noise you made, it reminded me of something an ape would make. That sort of a simian sound.
That's exactly what it sounded like. Exactly. I mean, at first it was kind of, maybe there's a coyote.
Sure.
Because, what I had said before, I had gone. That's the reason I had gone out there. Was coyotes? Maybe the Sasquatch run with them. Not run with them, but the coyotes will tend to follow and scavenge after the Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, I haven't really heard the coyotes lately. And then to hear that, and I'm like, that's something's off. And then when it did the rumble thing at the end, was just, oh my gosh, what was that?
That's
and it
very
wasn't
telling.
That far away.
Yeah.
What's that?
That's very telling.
Yeah, definitely. And and it wasn't that far from the house.
How far do you think it
was?
What's your estimate?
Maybe the football field, maybe.
How far?
Maybe a football field distance, half a football field.
Yeah,
so not too far.
That's not too far. Yeah.
No, we have a a dirt road, and it's not vehicle accessible, that runs out to the trail that I went down on, and that's kind of where it sounded like the sound was coming from. But I can't be sure, but I do know that it was close. It wasn't off in the distance. It was fairly close.
You know, it's interesting. There were two instances that I can think of back. You know, when I met Green and Hinden, I met a Washington State trooper by the name of Mark Pittenger in their camp, who, and this is how we knew they were hunting coyotes. He had seen all three of the creatures. I saw two of the three. We knew there were three of them in that area at the time. And so he was tracking them on another time after he saw these things walk in front of his patrol car one evening. And he found, and Pittenger was a big guy, and he was carrying a 30-06 rifle, and he stumbled upon where he found these coyotes, and he said, I could tell instantly what had happened. He says, apparently something had lured these things in, and when they got too close, they grabbed them by their hindquarters and smashed their heads against the alder trees.
Oh, wow.
And then tore them apart and ate them. And he says, I knew what it was because I followed these Sasquatch tracks to this place. And it was pretty obvious what happened to him. And he said it scared him so bad he crawled out of there on his stomach, low crawled out. Because he didn't want them to know he was there.
I know that feeling.
And there was another time when John Green played a recording. I don't have it anymore. I used to have a copy of it. But they had, and when you listen to the recording, you'd think, okay, that's a coyote. It was a single individual making these noises, but they weren't the typical yippy, barky noises that coyotes make.
Yeah, exactly.
They were sort of long, drawn-out sounds. They sounded like coyote, but what they did was they recorded known coyotes in the same area. And that was full of the yippy, long, kind of yowly. I mean, you could hear the group of coyotes making noises. And he told me the kicker was the single individual was a quarter of a mile away, and the recording was made inside of a house with all the doors and windows closed, and it sounded like it was right outside.
Wow.
And it was just incredible. I remember it stuck with my memory, the impact, the twist on that story, and I thought, oh my God. But we knew that they would imitate animal noises.
Yeah, after listening to your shows, and that's crazy what they can do.
It's they've actually, and that's what's led me to believe that they're an apex predator, because they do these various things as part of hunting behavior.
Right.
And they've got a pretty good toolbox at their disposal, it seems, with all these different types of noises, and they're very intelligent. Of course, primates are extremely intelligent, most intelligent animals on the planet, so it holds that they would be intelligent enough not only to survive well, but to have all these different things that they can do at their disposal.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, let me ask you something. Do you, and I know this is going to sound, but do you think that they possibly could imitate a human voice if they needed to?
I think it's possible. I mean, I've heard from a number of people I've interviewed over the years that said what they thought was either human speech, but not quite like a person would say things. So I do think it's possible. Of course, again, it's one of those things, we have to have one in a lab and experiment with it.
Yeah, that's right.
But I don't see why it's not possible, especially if they're a hominid and not part of the ape family.
Right. Well, the only reason I ask that is, as a kid, woods was my home. I'd be out playing in the woods. Well, I would hear somebody call my name.
Yeah.
And there'd be nobody around. I'd look, and I'm like, oh, well, maybe it's my parents. So I'd walk back. I'd go home, and hey, what did you need? You guys calling for me? No, didn't say a word.
Let me ask you, did your parents ever yell for you outside, call your name?
My For dinner, yeah, my mom would. Yeah, she'd call us all individually, and then she'd say, "Come on in, it's dinner time."
The reason I ask is, it's possible they, were watching you and heard this and maybe picked that noise up, to copy.
That's a scary thought.
Well, it is, and it makes you wonder if that's true, how often it actually happens.
Yeah.
With people being unaware of it.
Yeah. Well, I do know as a kid, I'd spend a lot of time with my grandmother, and I always thought she was overprotective kind of person, and being a kid, I guess they would never say there was disappearances or anything like that. They wouldn't tell children.
Right.
But if I was ever outside, she would always yell, "Where are you?" Yeah, I'd had to be in sight. I always had to be somewhere where she could see me. And, looking back and her telling me of her encounter, maybe she knew a lot more than what she said.
And, I've heard that a few times, from people talking about grandparents or older members of their family or family friends with the same kind of concerns. And I think the old-timers knew a lot more than they were ever willing to say, especially to outsiders.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just, wow. Yeah. So I know they had a logging company come up to their property and log some trees out of there. She owned quite a bit of property. And I remember one day the logging guy was coming. He had gone in, and maybe within an hour or so, the trucks came back, and he didn't have any logs on. And my grandmother went out, and they were talking, and then he left, and they never came back.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, I never asked, because, being a kid, you like to see the logging trucks go in. They had the big skidders and stuff like that.
Sure.
But he when he left, I was just like, oh, they must have got all the logs they needed. But there's still quite a bit of forest up there, so I don't know. Never really crossed my mind to ask, what was that all about,
Yeah, I think a lot of things happen like that in life, and you don't really think about it, especially not knowing the wider context.
Right.
And that's why I always tell people, you have to know the context of what's going on in an area. In other words, I mean, like my own situation, my own encounters. It's taken, nearly 45 years now. In fact, it'll be 45 years in December, the first time I found footprints. And it's taken all these years for stories to trickle in from that area, where I'm getting a bigger picture of what was really going on there. So, and understanding what the creatures were doing. So, and it really takes a lot of work to understand the context of an area, and especially what's going on with these things. We get these little pieces, people like your sighting, for instance, or my own. You get a few moments of them being in a particular place, or it may be something they were doing.
Exactly.
But you don't know what else they were doing. What's the bigger picture? What was? And I'll give you an example. We investigated Yacolt, Washington, back in '89-90 for 9 months. We were lucky this particular group stayed in that area that long before leaving. Yeah. And so we were able to, get a much more complete picture of what was happening. But typically, that's not what happens.
Yeah. Now, do you think they go into an area and then leave, migrate, or do you think they stay around?
Well, typically, and this is probably 95% of the time or more. They're in an area for about 2 weeks, and then they move on to the next feeding area. They rotate feeding areas throughout the range. So they're usually on the move all the time, which makes them very difficult to catch up with. It's why, people, and here's the bottom line with it. People say they had a sighting in this place. Well, you don't know how long they were in that particular feeding area. Right. It might be the last day they were there before they bugged out to the next area that was, say, 10 miles away or whatever the distance is.
That's right, yeah.
And so people say, well, there's nothing here because nobody ever saw it again. It took me years to track one individual group to kind of figure out what their patterns were. and it was a lot of work. I spent, thousands of hours in the field really tracking this group and trying to pin them down. And I could still only get within about 30 days of where they were going to be in a place. So they're very difficult to catch up with because of that particular kind of behavior. On weird occasions, like with the occult situation, why they stayed in that particular area, I never was able to figure out. There was something that fascinated them with that particular location, and then all of a sudden they were gone.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I know, they never came back.
Oh wow! No, I've heard, and I wonder if they have a good food source, a good water source, and if they're left alone, I wonder if they would just like for example the Yakel incident where they were there, but then if they feel as they might be being encroached upon, so to speak, they're gonna bug out.
I think in that particular case, nobody. Well, there were a lot of older people that lived on the south side of town, and people that just didn't go out on their property, so they weren't bothered. And when I took my team in there, we didn't go in there when they were there. Mm-hmm. In other words, at night, we left them alone. We would stay near the house or on the road in a car, not out doing anything, listening, observing what was going on. In the daytime is when they would be off in their bedding areas. So then we could proceed to search the areas. And I think that's key if anybody, is seriously interested in looking at these things in the field. You really need to be out of their area when they're feeding, which is typically at night. At night,
yeah, and that's what I kind of want to do my research is, if you, I don't know if I'd want to go out at night and interrupt their hunt, their feeding, and then have them run off. I don't want to be that guy that was responsible for chasing these things away.
And it'll happen because human presence is something they really dislike, and it can alter their behavior, in a very traumatic way.
Oh, absolutely.
So if you're in their feeding area, expect them to bug out to another area. It's not untypical at all.
Yeah. I think to me it just makes more sense to go in the daytime. You're not going to be disrupting anything, and if a sighting, you're going to get if you're going to have a sighting, you're going to have a sighting whether it's day or night.
Right, and they're going to know if you're there. So usually, I think when a sighting occurs, it's because they're doing something. There's a reason they're allowing you to get that close to them.
Right.
If they don't want you to see them, then you're probably not going to see them.
You're not going to. Exactly. And that brings up the other thing with people saying, "Oh, they're a friendly giant." Well, no, because
no, they're not.
no, absolutely. I mean, people have to think of this logically. If they're a friendly giant, there would be a lot more encounters where
it would have been a done deal a long time ago, centuries ago, because people would have known all about them. They would have gotten close to them, and you're right. It's common sense.
Yeah, and like any wild animal, I mean, let's say a bunny rabbit, for example. You go out they're not going to attack you. A bunny rabbit is not going to come charging you, but it is a wild animal, and it's going to run. It's not going to stay and go, "Oh, pet me, I'd like to have my ears rubbed." No, this thing is going to fly out of there as fast as it can. And the same way as with a Bigfoot.
And if you notice, this is something people don't think about because we're sort of in our own little world. We don't think about our posture and things like that. Upright posture in nature is usually an aggressive posture.
That's right.
Otherwise, like if you see a bear get up on its hind legs, that's usually an aggressive posture. Mm-hmm. So, because we walk that way naturally, animals fear us because that's an aggressive posture.
Yeah.
The Sasquatch, most of the time, moves the same way.
Right.
So, and if they are, like I believe they are, an apex predator, look at other apex predators. What do other predators do? You don't see predators typically.
Right.
You know, you can't go out wandering through the forest. You're just going to see a cougar here or a bobcat there or
No,
a wolf or something
no.
like that. You just don't see them. And there's a reason for that. It's survival.
That's right. Yeah, they don't want to be seen. They don't want to be bothered with. You know, and I don't know, these people that go out there and put out these feeding huts and whatever, they're asking for a boatload of trouble. They really are.
And that's just it. I mean, and it really depends on the group. Now, they kind of have a nasty disposition anyway. But
Right.
depending on the individual and group and a whole host of factors, and at that particular moment or day, I mean, it could be different day to day, you know, depending on moods and you know, the animal psychology and all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
And its experience with people, you know, and their age and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I sort of think the older they get or the more inexposed to people they are, when you look at the older stories in the past, where people were out in these very remote regions, away from population, human population, it seems like the farther out and more remote they got, the more aggressive these things were.
Yes, you're right.
So we're getting a mixture of these kinds of behaviors with people encountering them, and it depends. You have to really look at all the factors involved about why, you know, the creatures behave the way they did in that particular instance. I mean, it could be simple things like when you and your friends, you know, heard those noises, and you felt the creature at first thought there was just one person, and then when it discovered there were more, that's something that will trigger these things to be fearful. That may not have been initially, but when it figured out there was more than one person,
Right.
that changed the dynamic of the situation.
Because it came right for my buddy, and as soon as me and my brother started to beefeat it out of there, it turned tail. It was like, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think that makes
it
makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Well, did you have any other questions or anything else that was that you'd seen or in the field? Or did I ask you why you picked that particular area to look at?
Yeah, and it was because the coyotes had been out there, and I was just trying to see if maybe there was a correlation between the coyotes and the Bigfoot, and so I chose that area. And to be honest with you, I really didn't want to go back to the area that I had my encounter.
I'll tell you what, that noise you mentioned when you heard the coyote and then it made that ape-like sound at the end, that's one of those things when I hear things like that, and it really grabs my imagination, you know, because that is so unusual. It's so different. It's like I say, it's one of those things when it slaps me across the back of my head, that tells me it's not something normal.
And I've got to get back out there and to, you know, research. I've Google mapped this area, and it is just it's immense. It's huge.
Well, don't go alone. Don't go alone.
No. I'll be taking a buddy or somebody with me. Be dragging somebody along. Somebody's for it though.
That's good. Well, any final thoughts? We're running low on time.
Okay. No. I just I wish I hadn't waited 23 years. And I'm glad that I found your podcast and listened to it, and that's what made me decide to, let's research this. Like I said, I've always been interested in the subject matter of Bigfoot, and hearing all these encounters, these people coming forward and telling this story. That gave me the courage to open up about it. So thank you for what you do.
Oh, I appreciate that, and I tell you what, it's a real service. I think when witnesses like yourself, and I did this myself, and it's helped other people come out and talk about it. It's, like you said, it was 23 years, and that stuff stays bottled up. And,
absolutely.
and especially since we don't really have a frame of reference. I think we have more of one today because there's so much stuff out there, whether it's good or bad. At least everybody has a little bit of more knowledge than what we had many years ago.
Right.
But if you've had an experience like that, and a lot of things with these experiences don't fit anything that we're familiar with.
No, I mean, this is nothing I've ever encountered before.
And it's very traumatic. And when the more people that come out and talk about what's happened to them, it helps other people.
Indeed, exactly.
And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people and it was like a huge weight lifted off their shoulders.
Yes. Yep. You're 100%. You're right on. And I just hope that somebody who's listening to this says, okay, I can do it. If this guy, can do it 23 years later, yeah, I can come out. And I think I'm at the age now where if somebody doesn't believe me, too damn bad.
Well, and
I know what I saw.
That's my view too. I really don't give a damn what anybody thinks.
Yep.
And I did for a long time. And it wasn't until after Renee DeHinden passed away that friends talked me into beginning writing and actually having a public presence, because I wasn't going to do it. I mean, I didn't mind doing the research and trying to get to the bottom of things, but I wasn't interested in speaking out to everyone. But it's actually been good because it's brought a lot of people forward to help other people, and I think that's great.
Yeah, I'm glad you do what you do, and keep up the good work.
Well, thanks, Fred. I certainly appreciate it. Listen, thank you for talking about what happened to you, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, my friend. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.